My name is Susan Mitchell. I'm 54 years old, though sometimes I feel like I'm still that 30-something woman who could juggle a career, a family, and a social life. It's strange how time moves, slow in some moments, yet so fast in others. I've been retired for about 2 years now, and I still haven't gotten used to it. Every day I wake up and wonder what exactly I'm supposed to be doing. I used to live for deadlines, for numbers. Now, it's just me, a cup of coffee, and a pile of books by the window. I'm not lonely per se, but life after work is quieter than I expected. I spend my time on things I never had time for when I was working, reading, gardening, the occasional puzzle. There's a certain peace to it, but also a quiet emptiness. That's how it feels when you've spent decades working hard, and then one day, everything just stops. I was an accountant for most of my adult life, working in the same firm for nearly 25 years. I loved it. Numbers have always made sense to me, unlike so many other things in life. The predictable rhythms of tax season, the balance sheets that balanced, the reports that never seemed to have errors. It was an elegant dance of organization, structure, and detail, and it was the perfect life for someone like me. But all things come to an end. I hit 50, the company restructured, and I decided it was time to step away. The decision was mine, but it wasn't an easy one. It felt like the end of an era. My daughter, Kim, was already in her late 20s by the time I retired. She had always been the ambitious one. While I found peace in a well-organized life, Kim was out there pushing boundaries, starting projects, chasing dreams. She had big ideas, always had the spark of creativity I never quite understood. But that's okay. We're different, and I admire that about her. Kim had always been a little impulsive, a trait she no doubt inherited from her father. I remember when she decided to leave her job in advertising to start a business. She came to me one evening, all excited, her eyes wide with possibility. Mom, she said, setting down her coffee cup, I'm opening a studio, a place for creativity, for art, design, something different. I need your help on paper. I wasn't exactly sure what she meant by help on paper. But as any mother would, I agreed. I'd seen her struggle with various jobs in the past, and this felt like her time. She was determined. How could I say no? She didn't ask for much, and she was always careful with her words. I trusted her. She was my daughter. I didn't hesitate. Of course, sweetheart, I told her. Whatever you need. And that's how I found myself involved in something I never thought I would be. A business. I'd spent my whole career making sure other people's businesses were in order. But this was different. This was personal. Kim explained to me that I needed to sign a few papers to help her get started with the LLC. She told me that I would be the official owner, but she would be the managing partner. That made sense to me. I'd seen other business ventures before, and the LLC seemed like a straightforward structure, a business model I could understand. She assured me that it would be simple, just a formality. She was already busy with the day-to-day operations, setting up the space, meeting potential clients. I trusted her completely. So I signed the documents. My name went on them. Susan Mitchell, owner. Kim handled everything else. Looking back, I can't say I regret helping her. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing, supporting my daughter's dreams, being a good mother. But what I didn't realize was that I was signing my own name away. I thought I was just doing a small favor, but it would turn out to be the first step into something much bigger, much more complicated. A year passed. I checked in every now and then, made sure everything was running smoothly. Kim kept telling me how well things were going. There were some struggles. What business doesn't have them? But overall, the studio seemed to be growing. She was working long hours, building relationships with clients, getting good reviews. I was proud of her. She was succeeding in a way I hadn't expected. But then, one morning, I got a letter in the mail. It was a large envelope stamped with the official seal of the tax office. I could feel my pulse quicken as I opened it. Inside was a demand for $200,000 in unpaid obligations. I read the letter several times, trying to make sense of it. My stomach churned. This couldn't be right. There must have been some mistake. I picked up the phone and called Kim. Honey, I said, my voice shaking, there's something wrong. The tax office says we owe $200,000. What's going on? She was quiet on the other end. I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Well, she said, you signed it yourself. I didn't ask you to trust me blindly, Mom. The words hit me like a slap. I stared at the phone, feeling the weight of her response. This wasn't a mistake. This was no error in the system. This was intentional. And in that moment, I realized that I'd been played. But I wasn't one to give up easily. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I took off my glasses, sat down at the kitchen table, and began looking through the documents. This was my name on the line, and I wasn't about to let this go without understanding exactly what had happened. The puzzle had just begun, and I was determined to solve it. I spent the next few days buried in paperwork. The letters from the tax office piled up on the kitchen counter, but I ignored them. My focus was on what I had signed. I knew my accounting background would help me make sense of the situation, if there was something to make sense of. The LLC documents were straightforward enough, or so it seemed at first. My name was clearly listed as the owner, and Kim was named as the managing partner. But as I went over the papers again, something didn't sit right with me. It was all too clean, too simple. There were no red flags, no warning signs. I couldn't understand why, after a year of operation, the tax office was suddenly asking for such a hefty sum. I took a break and sat down with a cup of tea. As I sipped it, I thought back to how Kim had pitched the idea to me, how she had made everything sound so easy. She was passionate, enthusiastic, and I had been so eager to support her. But now, in the cold light of day, it was all beginning to feel like I'd been caught in a trap. I pulled out the most recent bank statements from the business and started comparing them to the balance sheets I had been given at the time I signed the papers. At first, I didn't see anything alarming. The figures seemed to match up, but then I noticed discrepancies in the expenses. Some seemed inflated, others entirely fabricated. I pulled out the invoices I had signed off on and looked at them more closely. That's when I saw it. The numbers didn't add up. There were charges for supplies and services I knew weren't purchased, and there were payments to vendors I had never heard of. I felt a pit form in my stomach. I wasn't a fool. I knew what this looked like. This wasn't a mistake or oversight. Kim had been deliberately hiding something. She had set up a business, put my name on it, and then run it in a way that benefited her while leaving me exposed to the financial fallout. It was a classic scheme, and I was the unwitting victim. But I wasn't going to sit around and let it destroy me. I wasn't about to let anyone get away with this, especially not my own daughter. I needed to understand what had really been happening behind the scenes. I made a few calls, and one thing led to another. The first step was to contact a lawyer who specialized in business fraud and tax disputes. I explained the situation in detail, not holding anything back. The lawyer listened carefully, then asked me for all the documents I had, including the financial statements, tax filings, and any communication I'd received from Kim. You've got a case, he said after reviewing the material. This looks like it's not just bad management. This is fraud, plain and simple, but it's going to take some time and effort to build the case. I agreed to proceed, but I knew I had to do more than just sit back and wait for legal proceedings. I needed to take control of the situation. The next step was to hire an auditor to review the business's financial history. I wanted an independent set of eyes to go through the books with a fine-tooth comb. After a few days of waiting, the auditor came back with a report that confirmed what I had already suspected. The discrepancies weren't just mistakes, they were deliberate actions to hide income and inflate expenses. There were even payments made to personal accounts under fake company names. It was a mess, and my name was tied to it all. But then something unexpected happened. One of the studio's employees, a young guy named Alex, approached me privately. I hadn't known much about him. He was a part-time assistant, someone Kim hired to help with the day-to-day operations. But Alex had an air of honesty about him, something that I hadn't seen in anyone at the studio before. "I think you should know something," he said nervously. "There's more to the story than you realize." I listened as Alex explained that he had seen things from the inside that didn't sit well with him. He had overheard conversations between Kim and another individual, someone who was helping her manage the finances on the side. He didn't know the details, but it was clear that something wasn't right. He had also seen how Kim had manipulated the books, covering up the reality of the business's financial health. "I never wanted to get involved in this," Alex said, "but I think you deserve to know the truth." I felt a wave of gratitude for him. He wasn't trying to make money off me. He was just trying to do the right thing. He gave me some key documents, emails, invoices, and transaction logs that were hidden in Kim's office. It was enough to further confirm what I had suspected. Kim wasn't just running the business poorly, she was running it with a hidden agenda, using my name as a shield to protect herself from the consequences. With the evidence in hand, I knew I had to act quickly. There was no way I could let this continue. No way I could let Kim get away with it. I wasn't going to allow my name to be tarnished by her actions, and I wasn't going to let her destroy what little peace I had left. I started to plan my next move carefully, knowing that the battle wasn't going to be easy. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to lose. Not now. Not after everything I'd already been through. This was my business now. And if Kim thought she could walk away unscathed, she had another thing coming. I remember the exact moment I called Kim. It wasn't a long conversation, but it was one I'll never forget. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. Her voice was chipper, almost too cheerful. "Hi, Mom. What's up?" I clenched my jaw, trying to control the rising tide of frustration that threatened to spill over. "Kim, I just received a notification from the tax office," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're saying we owe $200,000 in unpaid obligations. What the hell is going on?" There was a long silence on the other end, followed by a sigh that sounded rehearsed. "Well, you signed it yourself, didn't you?" Kim's tone was defensive, almost dismissive. "I didn't ask you to trust me blindly, Mom." Her words hit me like a slap. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't taking any responsibility. She wasn't even trying to explain or apologize. She was shrugging it off as if it was my fault for trusting her. "Kim," my voice faltered for a moment, but I steadied myself. "I trusted you. I helped you because you asked. I believed in you." "Well, you should have read the fine print," she replied coldly. "It's your name on the paperwork, Mom. If you're so concerned about it, maybe you should have been more careful." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the realization that she wasn't just making a mistake. This wasn't a simple issue of oversight. This was a scheme. She had intentionally set up the business in a way that left me liable for everything. It wasn't just a lack of judgment. It was calculated. And now I was standing at the edge of a financial disaster, with no way to back out. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to let her see me crumble. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. There was a cold, precise part of me that needed to think, to figure out my next move. This was just another challenge, and I had faced worse before. I cleared my throat and responded, my voice calm but firm. This isn't just about the paperwork, Kim. This is about you using my name to cover up your mistakes. And now it's all falling apart. You've been dishonest with me. I need you to be honest now. For a moment, she didn't reply. The silence stretched, and I could almost hear her calculating how to respond. Finally, she let out a bitter laugh. Honestly, Mom, this is your mess now. You should have never gotten involved. If you want to fix it, go ahead. It's all yours. And with that, she hung up. The line went dead, and I sat there staring at the phone in my hand. I felt a cold emptiness settle in my stomach, but it wasn't despair. It was something different, a sharp, focused clarity. I didn't feel defeated. I wasn't going to let this ruin me. But I knew now that this was bigger than just a simple misunderstanding. This was a betrayal, and it wasn't something I could simply forgive. I took off my glasses and put the phone down. The first step was to look at everything, every single document I had signed, every number I had approved. I knew what I had to do. I had to find the truth buried within the lies. I took out the stacks of paperwork, sorted through the folders, and started reading with a level of scrutiny I hadn't applied before. As a retired accountant, I was accustomed to spotting inconsistencies and red flags, but this was different. Kim had hidden things well, too well. I started with the financial statements. There was a clear pattern of inflated expenses, payments that didn't make sense, and reports that contradicted each other. But the real eye-opener came when I looked at the vendor invoices. I recognized a few names, suppliers Kim had claimed to use regularly, but there were others, vendors I had never heard of, who had received substantial payments for services I knew hadn't been rendered. And there were even payments made to accounts I didn't recognize, accounts that didn't seem connected to the business at all. I could feel the anger rising again, but I forced myself to focus. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was a time for action. I started organizing everything into categories: fraudulent transactions, inflated expenses, and misappropriated funds. I made notes in the margins of the papers, drawing lines between related items. The more I worked, the clearer it became. Kim had been running a scheme, a well-thought-out one that relied on my trust and my ignorance, but now I had the tools to dismantle it. It was time to call in the experts. I contacted a lawyer who specialized in business fraud. I explained the situation in detail, and he agreed to meet with me. The lawyer reviewed the documents I had compiled and nodded as he went over them. "You've got a strong case here," he said, looking up from the papers. "This isn't just mismanagement, this is fraud. You've got a clear path to take legal action if you want." I didn't need to be told twice. I knew I had to take this to the authorities. But before I could do that, there was one more thing I needed: an auditor. I needed someone who could sift through the business's financial records and confirm what I already suspected. I reached out to a trusted auditor, one I had worked with in the past. He agreed to take a look and promised me a thorough review. As we waited for the results, I began to formulate my plan. The first thing I knew I had to do was remove Kim from the equation. She couldn't be allowed to keep running the business. She had abused my trust, and now it was time to take control. The auditor's report confirmed everything I feared. The numbers didn't add up, and the discrepancies were too large to ignore. It wasn't just bad bookkeeping, it was criminal activity. Now I was ready to act. It was time to take back what was mine. The real fight was just beginning. The weight of the situation hit me fully in the quiet of that night. The paperwork spread out across the dining table, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. It was like I was the only one left in the world. But I wasn't going to crumble under this. I wasn't someone who threw in the towel at the first sign of trouble. I had faced worse in my life and come out stronger. This time, though, it felt personal. Kim, my own flesh and blood, had set this trap, and now it was my job to untangle it. The first thing I did was meet with the lawyer. I wasn't sure what I was hoping to hear, but I knew I had to do it. I sat down with him in his sleek office, listening to the clink of coffee cups as he flipped through the paperwork I had brought, his brow furrowed as he examined each sheet. "You've got a serious problem here, Susan," he said, pinning a document with his finger. "These aren't just small mistakes. This looks like a coordinated effort to hide income, inflate expenses, and move money around in ways that suggest intentional fraud. You need to think about how you're going to proceed, because this isn't going to be a simple fix." I nodded, absorbing every word. This wasn't just a tax issue. This was something bigger. The business wasn't just mismanaged. It had been systematically manipulated. The question was, why? And more importantly, how could I stop it? After the lawyer's office, I drove straight to the auditor's. He was an old colleague, a man who had been in the game long enough to know the ins and outs of even the most convoluted financial schemes. We sat across from each other in his small, cluttered office, where the smell of coffee mixed with the faint scent of old paper. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I've gone over the records," he said after we exchanged the usual greetings. "There's a trail here, Susan. A clear trail of misreported income and fabricated expenses. You weren't just an accidental participant in this. Someone was covering their tracks, and it wasn't you." I felt a flicker of validation in my chest, but it quickly gave way to determination. "Who do you think did it?" I asked, my voice hardening with resolve. The auditor leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Honestly, it's hard to say who pulled the strings, but based on the transactions, the way money was funneled into certain accounts, I'd bet money that someone with authority in the business had to be behind it. This wasn't just poor bookkeeping. This was deliberate." That was all I needed to hear. The pieces started falling into place. The inconsistencies I had noticed, the payments to unfamiliar vendors, the disappearing cash. They were all part of a larger scheme to hide misappropriated funds, and I knew who had the most to gain from it. Kim had orchestrated this. She had been the one pulling the strings, using my name and my trust to manipulate the system, and now she was going to pay the price. But I wasn't ready to throw in the towel. I had one more thing to do. There was still a chance to turn this around, to salvage what was left of the business and make sure I wasn't left with the ruins. But it was going to require more than just legal action. It would take a full investigation, a careful, deliberate look into every corner of this mess. That's when I decided to meet with one of the employees. His name was Tom, and he'd been with the company since the early days. I had a hunch that he knew more than he was letting on. Tom had always been quiet, the kind of employee who kept his head down and did his work without asking questions. But I'd seen him around the office enough to know that he was more observant than most. I invited him to meet me for coffee one afternoon. We sat in a small cafe, the murmur of conversation and clinking cups filling the space between us. Tom seemed nervous at first, his hands fidgeting with the sleeve of his jacket, but as I laid out the situation, I saw his posture shift. He wasn't as surprised as I thought he would be. "I didn't want to get involved, Mrs. Mitchell," he said quietly, glancing around nervously. "But I've seen things that didn't add up. I thought if I stayed out of it, I could keep my job. But now, with everything coming to light, I think it's time to tell you what I know." I leaned in, my eyes narrowing. "What do you know, Tom?" He hesitated for a moment, then began speaking in hushed tones. "There were transactions I saw going through the system that didn't make sense. Payments to companies I'd never heard of, and strange reimbursements for supplies that never showed up. I don't know much, but I can tell you that Kim's been keeping some of the money for herself. The bigger expenses, the ones that were supposed to go to the business, they were diverted. My heart sank. It was worse than I thought. Tom went on, explaining how Kim had been paying herself extra, funneling business funds into personal accounts. She had been stealing from the business, and from me, for a long time. This was no longer just about a bad business decision. This was a betrayal, plain and simple. I thanked Tom for his honesty, but I knew there was no turning back now. I had enough information to take the next steps. It wasn't just about fixing the financial mess Kim had made. It was about making sure that this didn't happen again. I couldn't trust her anymore. I had to take control. The only thing left to do was figure out how to pull the trigger, how to remove her from the business, restructure the debts, and protect what was left of my name. It was time to take action. I didn't sleep much that night. The thoughts swirled in my head, a cyclone of numbers, paperwork, and plans. I knew what I had to do next. Kim had stolen from me, manipulated the system, and used my trust to create this mess. But I wasn't about to let her walk away without facing the consequences. I'd been the one who built a life from nothing. No way was I going to let her ruin everything I had worked for. The first step was simple, but crucial. I had to act fast, and I had to take full control. The next morning, I walked into the office with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. The studio was busy, bustling with activity, as usual. The employees moved about, unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. I went straight to Kim's office, or rather, the office she'd claimed as her own. The door was closed, but I didn't knock. I opened it without hesitation, stepping inside. Kim looked up from her computer, startled by my sudden appearance. "Mom, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice defensive. She knew something was off, but she didn't know how much I knew. "I need to talk to you," I said, my voice steady, unshaken. "It's time for you to step down." Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of disbelief passing over her face. "What do you mean, step down? This is my business. You've always just helped me on paper, and now you're trying to take control? What's going on?" "I'm the one whose name is on everything," I replied, my voice colder now. "I'm the one responsible for this mess, and I'm the one who's gonna fix it." She scoffed, standing up and pacing in front of me. "You can't just take over. I've worked too hard for this. This is my life's work, and you're just going to destroy it. You don't understand anything about how businesses work." "I understand enough," I said, looking her squarely in the eye. "You built it on my name, and now I'm the one who's going to take it from here. I'm removing you from management, effective immediately." Her face turned pale. The anger in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of panic, but she didn't say anything right away. She crossed her arms, visibly trying to hold herself together, but I could see the cracks in her composure. "You can't do that," she whispered, almost pleading now. "This is my business, Mom. You can't just throw me out like this." "I'm not throwing you out, Kim," I said. "I'm taking control of something that should have been mine from the start. You've crossed the line, and I won't let you ruin everything I've worked for. You're no longer the managing partner. I'm bringing in an external auditor to oversee everything from here on out." She took a deep breath, trying to gather her thoughts, but I could see the anger rising within her again. "You're ruining everything. You're destroying my future." "No, Kim," I said firmly, walking towards the desk. "You destroyed your own future when you decided to use me as a pawn in your game." Her eyes were full of fury now, but there was also something else, fear. She realized in that moment that I wasn't going to back down. This wasn't about being a mother anymore. This was about justice, about protecting what was mine. "I don't care what you think," I said, standing tall. This is my name on the line now, and I'm taking back control. Kim opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned on my heel and left the room, walking down the hall with purpose. The employees watched me as I passed, but I didn't stop. I had one goal in mind: to fix the damage that had been done, to take what was rightfully mine, and to do it without looking back. By the time I reached my office, I had already made the necessary calls. I arranged for an external auditor to come in and review everything. A forensic accountant would dig through the books and uncover every misstep, every fraudulent transaction. I couldn't risk missing anything. The hardest part, though, was dealing with Kim. She wasn't going to accept this quietly. I could already hear the arguments in my head, the accusations she would hurl at me. But none of it mattered. She had built this empire of lies on my name, and it was time for her to face the consequences. I sent an email to all the employees, notifying them of the management change. I reassured them that the business would continue operating as usual, but there was no question now. I was in charge. Kim tried to call me multiple times throughout the day, but I didn't answer. She came to my office once, demanding to speak with me, but I wasn't interested in her pleas. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. When the day was finally over, I stood in front of the mirror in my office, taking a long, steady look at the woman I had become. The reflection staring back at me was one of strength and resolve. I had fought for my career, my family, and my dignity, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me, not even my own daughter. Tomorrow would be a new day, and it was mine to control. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategy. My life was consumed by the business, and I didn't mind one bit. Every piece of paper, every financial record, every transaction had to be examined. I had to know the full extent of Kim's betrayal before I could clean up the mess she'd left behind. The external auditor came in, just as I'd arranged, and started sifting through the books. I sat with them, going over every line of every document, and slowly but surely the picture began to emerge. Kim had forged signatures, exaggerated expenses, and misreported profits. She'd spent company funds on personal luxuries, and there were countless payments to shell companies that were nearly impossible to trace. As the discrepancies mounted, I felt a cold satisfaction. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't incompetence. It was deliberate. Kim had been using the business, using me as a vehicle for her own selfish desires. And now she had to face the consequences. But there was still work to do. I had to take control of the company's operations, restructure its debts, and ensure that everything ran smoothly going forward. My first task was to remove the toxic elements, the employees who were loyal to Kim and who might have been complicit in her schemes. I wasn't interested in keeping anyone around who might pose a threat to the stability of the business. I called in the heads of departments one by one. Some were surprised by the sudden change. Others seemed relieved. I reassured them that the company was still moving forward, that I was still committed to its success. The most difficult part was talking to the longtime staff, the ones who had been with Kim from the beginning. They looked at me with a mixture of fear and uncertainty, unsure of where their loyalties lay. "You're not gonna fire me, are you?" one of them asked me, nervously shifting in his chair. "I'm not here to destroy anyone's career," I said, giving him a reassuring smile. "But we need to be on the same page. This company is going to be run with integrity, and that means transparency and accountability from everyone." One by one, the pieces fell into place. I brought in a new general manager, someone with a reputation for running tight, clean operations. The new manager wasn't just a figurehead, he was a hands-on leader, and I made sure he knew exactly what was expected of him. I trusted him to help me rebuild the company from the ground up, and I gave him the freedom to make the tough decisions. Meanwhile, I worked closely with the auditor, making sure the company's debts were restructured. I negotiated with creditors and made sure we could cover the $200,000 tax bill, which was no small feat. But I wasn't afraid. In my years as an accountant, I had seen businesses weather worse storms. This was just another challenge, one I was determined to face head on. On the final day of the restructuring process, I walked through the studio, inspecting the changes that had been made. The offices were being reorganized. The staff was more focused. The once chaotic environment had become something more professional, more disciplined. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. The last piece of the puzzle was the sign. I had called the local sign company that morning, arranging for a new one to be made. The old sign had been Kim's, a bold, flashy nameplate with her picture and title. But now, the name on the door would be mine. It wasn't just about the ownership. It was about control, about asserting my place, not just as a mother, but as the rightful leader of this business. That afternoon, I stood in front of the studio, watching as the workers removed the old sign. The new one was sleek and professional, simple yet strong. It read, Owner S. Mitchell. I smiled. It wasn't just about the business, it was about reclaiming my life. I had worked for too long to let someone else take credit for my efforts. Kim had thought she could walk away without consequence, but I had made sure she understood. There were no shortcuts when it came to accountability. No excuses. I walked back inside the studio, and the employees greeted me with polite nods. There were no celebratory cheers or applause. They had seen enough drama already. But I could feel the shift in the air. I was no longer the quiet figure behind the scenes. I was the one in charge now. I spent the next few days settling into my new role. The staff came to me with their concerns. The new manager kept me updated on the company's performance, and I began to get the hang of overseeing the day-to-day operations. I still had a lot to learn, but I wasn't afraid of the work. Kim didn't come around much. She was angry, hurt, and likely embarrassed, but I didn't care. She could keep her distance. She wasn't needed anymore. This was my company now. By the end of the week, I had a new routine. Every morning, I arrived early, went over the reports, and checked in with the staff. I started making decisions without hesitation, and the studio began to run like a well-oiled machine. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, I felt in control. I had done it. I had taken back what was mine. And in the quiet of my office, with the new sign on the door and my fingers resting on the keyboard, I knew that I had not just reclaimed my business, I had reclaimed my life. The weeks that followed were a blur of small victories and steady progress. The company, under my watchful eye, was thriving. Clients were happy, staff morale was improving, and the financial reports looked better every month. It felt good to finally be at the helm of something I had once helped create, but had almost lost to my own daughter's recklessness. As the days passed, I had to remind myself to take a step back and breathe. It wasn't easy. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the debt, the legal battles, hung over me like a heavy cloud, but now I was finally free of it. The chaos had been replaced by a disciplined order. I had rebuilt the business from the ground up, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that away from me. Kim came by the office a few times, always uninvited. The first time, she stood in the lobby, staring at the new sign with her arms crossed. The resentment in her eyes was clear. She hadn't accepted the shift in power, but it didn't matter. "You really think you can just take over like this?" she asked when I stepped out to greet her. I wasn't going to engage in an argument, so I simply smiled. "I didn't take over, Kim. I took responsibility. This was always mine to fix." She fumed but didn't argue further. Over time, I noticed her dropping by less and less. I had expected her to try and sabotage me, to challenge my authority, but instead, she seemed to retreat into the background. She was no longer the owner, she was no longer in control. And that was a reality she couldn't change. I had her working under contract now, with a fixed salary. No more managerial role, no more decisions. It wasn't punishment, at least not entirely, but rather a way to protect the business from further risk. She didn't have the mindset for responsibility. She didn't have the discipline to run a company, and if she had any sense left, she would know that this was the only way I could ensure the company's future. I had no room for personal vendettas. This was about survival. Every Friday, I would go into the office, check the reports, review the progress of the week. The new manager kept everything running smoothly, and the rest of the staff had become more focused, more committed. I didn't micromanage. I didn't need to. I knew when to step in and when to stay out. But I always made my presence known. There was something powerful about walking into a room, knowing that everyone looked to me for guidance. The change in atmosphere was palpable. Kim didn't have access to any of the key decisions anymore. I'd made sure of that. Every once in a while, I'd catch her sneaking a glance at the financial statements or talking to an employee behind closed doors. But I didn't worry. I had already made it clear to the staff. Anything that was in her hands now was under my scrutiny. One Friday, as I sat at my desk, sipping my coffee and going over the reports, I felt an odd sense of satisfaction. The company was no longer the place where I had blindly followed my daughter's lead. It wasn't her dream anymore. It was mine. I had turned the ship around. The phone rang, breaking my concentration. I glanced at the screen. It was Kim. I hesitated for a moment but picked up. Mom. Her voice was tight, clipped. We need to talk. About what? I replied, without missing a beat. About the business. I knew where this was going. I'd been expecting it. She wanted control again, or maybe she just wanted to try and win back some of the respect she'd lost. I'm listening, I said, leaning back in my chair. I've been thinking. You know, I didn't realize how much I was taking for granted. I I didn't think you'd actually take it all from me, but I see now that I was wrong. Her words were carefully chosen. There was no anger, no fighting. It was just an admission, a quiet understanding of what had happened. I paused, then said simply, I'm glad you understand. I don't want to ruin things between us, she added. But I think we both know this. Situation isn't ideal. It's not what I planned. I'm sorry for what I did. I listened to her for a few more minutes as she stumbled through her apology. It was half-hearted, but it was there, and it was enough. But it didn't change the reality. I've been thinking about it too, I replied. But this is the way it is now. You have a role here. You can still contribute. But this company isn't yours anymore, Kim. I've been in control for a reason. There was silence on the other end. Then she sighed, a heavy, resigned sigh. I know. We didn't say much more after that. I didn't need to convince her any further. She knew I had won. I'd done what I set out to do. I had rebuilt what was nearly lost. More importantly, I had reclaimed my life. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I wasn't just an accountant. I was an investor, a leader, and a business owner. And as I hung up the phone, I stood up from my desk, walked over to the door, and looked at the sign. Owner, S. Mitchell. It wasn't just about the name. It wasn't just about the business. It was about ownership. It was about control. And it was about knowing that I had the strength to not only take back what was mine, but to make sure that no one could ever take it away again.